I guess I have the privilege of starting the meeting off. And I thought what I would do is, and we have an extended period of time today, and we'll also have some follow-up in the closed session tomorrow. So what I'd like to do is present kind of what we've been spending the last several months doing, and then here's the teaser for everyone here. We're also going to show you for the first time the new structure of, I want to call it a website, but that kind of really understates what it is. It's kind of the whole data interaction, data discovery environment that we've built out. And we're very excited about it. Hopefully you will be as well. And so this is really to kick off what we view as a several 2 or 3 month dialogue about how to make this most usable for the community, both from the data producer's perspective and the data consumer's perspective. And then also, kind of right off, I'll contradict Steve. What we'll see is, one of the things we'll show you is that not all the FaceBase data is actually in the hub. And one of the things we're very excited about is that we have integrated some really interesting takes on the data that don't actually exist in the hub. And that's some work that Paul Thomas has done. And just so we're going, everyone involved in the hub, if you would raise your hand so you know who to blame. So these are hub people to blame. Oh, and I should also say, if you need anything, Sean Sanders, who is there, she can, if you have any logistics questions, you can speak to Sean. So we should thank Sean for doing a lot of heavy lifting on the arrangements for this meeting. And Patricia in the back could also help you out. So that's all the logistics. And with that, we'll move on to the exciting stuff. If there are any questions as I'm going forward, feel free to just interrupt me, and don't wait to the end. So with that, let's kick off. So just as a highlight to summarize what we've been up to for the last several months is we've successfully completed the transition of the FaceBase One hub from Pitt to USC, and so now when you go and use the hub, that's actually on a server that's here. We've done a significant amount of work, and I'll talk about all these in a little more detail. We've actually done a significant amount of work looking at the existing data and seeing what we can do to make it easier to navigate and more useful. We've been doing a lot of work in gathering project requirements, as Yang mentioned, about imaging, the use of the Santa Cruz Genome Browser, and starting on some of the RNA-seq. We've done some work in how to represent and structure the data to make it more uniform and easier to find things, and we'll talk briefly about the data modeling. We've instituted and executed a slightly modified process for how we manage requests and dissemination of human subject data, and I'm happy to say, probably doesn't mean a lot to you, but it does to me, that as of yesterday, we've done our first official release of human subject data and transmitted that data then to a recipient using the kind of the new protocol for doing that. And we've tried to, and I think been reasonably successful in setting up a communication and collaboration infrastructure that Chris has been primarily responsible for around the wiki, and we've got a whole bunch of new mailing lists that are coming up, and we'll talk about that sometime today or tomorrow as well. So that's kind of a highlight of what we've been up to. Now I'm going to drill down and talk in a little more detail on all of these aspects. So as I had mentioned, we've successfully completed the transition of the FaceBase One site from the University of Pittsburgh to a USC. That was completed more or less on schedule in October. We were able to do so with essentially no interruption of service to the user community. We have been now, since the transition, have seen successful downloads of both FaceBase data for the animal data and the human subjects data. So the operation of the site has continued without interruption and fairly seamlessly and transparent to the user community. As Steve mentioned, and we talked about at the first meeting, there has been a moratorium on the contribution of new data. now that we have kind of the basic structure in place for the new site, and I've discussed this with Rob, so he's not going to kill me for saying this, we're ready now, kind of as of next week, to start discussions and working out how to start transitioning new data to the new repository and the new site. Part of this is going to be exploratory to figure out the best way to do that, but we're prepared to start those conversations as of next week. We do have a data wrangler as part of our team, and we'll be working with you and with our data curator to smooth that transition. So the floodgates for that are now open. Let's see, with regard to the current site, for a variety of reasons, we made kind of a decision that we're not doing any modifications or changes or adding new data to the existing site. The only exception for that is that we have been applying critical security patches. Just our luck, basically the day after we completed the transition, there was a critical security patch for Drupal. There was a well-known exploit that so we have applied those patches, so we're not compromised. But basically, we're essentially in maintenance mode on the current infrastructure, no real changes. And I want to take an opportunity here to really thank Mary and her team for making this a really kind of seamless and painless transition. It was a pleasure to work with them, and there were really no issues at all, so it was great. And much better than the last time we went through this exercise, which was a bit more miserable. So thank you again for all of your great help and cooperation on that. So that's the story with the site. And just going forward, I'm going to refer to that as the legacy data going forward. Not meant to be derogatory in any sense, but just to kind of differentiate the kind of the initial structured set of data from the FaceBase 2 data. So that's my terminology. With regard to the FaceBase 2 hub, we've made significant progress towards restructuring and recreating the data sharing infrastructure in a way that was consistent with what we said we were going to do in our proposal. Just a couple, and that's kind of the bulk of what I'm going to talk about today, because we think that's the kind of the thing you're probably most interested in. So a couple of thoughts about the new hub. Again, this is a long-term process. It's a 5-year activity, of course. So we're on a trajectory. We haven't achieved all of our goals yet. We've made a good step towards where we think we want to be. But so we did start with some overall design goals on what we want to achieve. So moving forward, we thought it was really important to try to focus on the user experience for discovering and downloading data. So from the consumer perspective, we wanted to increase the ability and transparency of the data that was on the hub. We wanted to provide integration of richer tools for how one looks and analyzes the data as part of kind of the core capability that FaceBase is presenting. From the perspective, so the first bullet is for the 40 people out in TV land. This third bullet is for the people sitting in this room. We wanted to work on streamlining and simplifying the upload and curation process for data contributions. And then ultimately, if we look at some of these additional kind of secondary funding sources that Steve talked about, where we're funding people to use the data, they're also they're going to have two hats on, in that they're not only going to be data consumers, but they'll be data producers as well. So ultimately, we want to start blurring this distinction between who's producing shareable data and who's consuming the data. And so we're not there yet, but ultimately, we're looking at a much more integrated data lifecycle process. And we want to set the stage and just getting a great foundation for doing enhanced functionality. For example, personalized data views, data kind of workbooks, workspaces, things like that. What you're going to see is a completely new implementation of the hub. So basically, We're not, for a variety of reasons, we're not using any of the existing software platform. I'm going to give you some kind of maybe a little more detail than you're interested in, but so you'll just have to bear with me. Some of this is a little inside baseball, but we're no longer using Drupal as the platform, which is this content management system that the FaceBase One Hub was based on. We've made a decision ultimately to do that for a variety of reasons. One of which is we're using kind of slightly more, in some sense, a little bit more modern approach. There's been a lot of interest in these so-called Web 2.0 platforms. We're using a combination of what's called static content and then application. So what you're looking at is essentially you're going to see an application that's delivered over the web, like Google, like like Gmail or something like that. So you're going to see a combination of an application and then a very small software stack, which is mostly just old-fashioned web pages, but we're using some very modern technology for generating that. So this has the advantage of, rather than this huge Drupal software stack, which is a bit difficult to maintain and is subject to security issues like the one we saw, it's very simple. It's going to be much more easy to maintain and doesn't have any of the security issues that, because of the complexity, is simpler. We've also separated out the data now is stored in a proper database rather than kind of integrated into this Drupal stack. This shouldn't matter to you, but what it does mean is it's going to be a lot easier for us to organize and slice and dice the data and provide a more unified view of the data. And hopefully you will see the advantages of this more consistent and unified view already. And then it's just a much more modern platform for how to deliver and high quality end user experience. So it's, again, kind of the same approach that you see in Gmail and Google Docs and those kinds of platforms. In fact, it's the same technology framework that's used to deliver Gmail we're using for delivering this experience. So part of what we spend a lot of time doing is focusing on how the data is organized, and this is what's called the data model. And this is important because the ability to discover and navigate the data is strongly influenced by the way you represent it. So some of the work that's been going on is, for example, the working groups on figuring out how do we characterize imaging data, how are we going to characterize genetic data. We've also done a lot of work on how do you glue these things together, because what we see in the FaceBase data is that you don't have just imaging, you don't have just genetics, they're tied together. They're images from genetic studies. And so we wanted to have a better way of how these things get glued together and you find them. So we've done a fair amount of work on taking the legacy data set and taking the existing data that's there and restructuring it in a way that we felt, and hopefully you'll agree, makes it a little more natural and intuitive to navigate and find things in that data. Because I think the data evolved over time as you tried to understand what you had and the values changed and things grew somewhat organically, we found that there was some amount of inconsistency in the values and the representation. So we spent some time going through this process called extract, translate, and load, or ETL, to clean up a bunch of the data, to take the existing data, just make it more consistent and uniform. We've augmented the model with new data types, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. For example, we now are explicitly representing OCT data, and I'll show you some work we're doing with that. That wasn't really in the old model. We started standardizing around the use of terminologies more. So, for example, the OCDM, standardized gene names. So we've started to make some initial steps in being a little more structured and rigorous about the use of standardized terms. Again, this will help for discovery. Let's see. Again, we've made a richer and more consistent model. For the new data coming in, we're developing a richer and more consistent model so you can find things in a more natural way. And again, finally, we've made some good initial progress with standardizing around metadata, terminology, and values. Again, this will help in the discovery process, so this will help both from the consumption side and the production side. So that's what's been going on with the model. I don't want to go into this in great detail. This is part of the work that Rob has been doing. This is what we call our FaceBase legacy schema. So what we've done is some transformation of the old data, again, to make it a little bit more uniform. Kind of the main takeaways from this picture. I mean, if people actually care about this, we can talk in more detail about it. But the main kind of takeaways from this picture are, in the initial Drupal-based model, I think you could grossly characterize it as a fairly flat schema. Where there were kind of a bunch of things that had kind of values attached to it. We've tried to put a little more structure on that, which again we think makes it a bit easier to navigate. And we've also then taken the terminology, which is the values and descriptions used for the data items, and made it more structured. So we now have the notion of lots of different domain-specific vocabularies, which can, some of them can be controlled vocabularies, like things from the ontologies that are being developed, could be outside terminologies, and ways of attaching them to the data in a more structured way that allows us to evolve those. And I won't go into any more detail than that. So this is basically an interim schema that we're using for a fairly simple conversion of the legacy data. We have a more elaborate schema that we're using for the new data, which is richer, and we'll probably translate some, with your assistance, we'll probably translate some of the legacy data into the richer schema as well. But that will require more input from the data producers to help us do that. Let's see. So now, we've also, now this is, Steve, to your point, we've also, through the work of Paul Thomas and his group, we've been looking at how to exploit some of the external sources of data that are available to us. In the original proposal, we talked about, and Paul, you should feel free to, if I get any of this wrong, just leap in. In the original proposal, we talked about interfacing to the Stanford Microarray database for gene expression analysis and tying that into FaceBase. I think that the takeaway message is basically there's not much going on in that particular data repository, in that database. So Paul looked around and did some analysis of where gene expression and the various gene data was coming from, and came to the conclusion that the NIH-funded GEO database was actually had everything that you wanted in the Stanford Microarray database and more. And so what he's done is, over the last several months, a significant amount of work in figuring out how we can seamlessly integrate data that's in GEO into the FaceBase hub. So what you're going to see is actually an integration, and it'll get better, but an interesting and fairly seamless integration of GEO data, GEO FaceBase data into FaceBase, the FaceBase hub. And this is just the first step of this. There's all kinds of additional things we can do beyond this. So as it turns out, there are already existing there's at least 2 data sets, some of Yang's data, and you said you found another one.
There are about 10 data sets right now in GEO, but only 2 of which have been curated by GEO. So there's a lot more information available about those because they've already been processed, and so you can get at the data in a lot of different ways. But that's one of the things we'll sort of talk about as possible future steps.
Right. So there's this wonderful
data curated.
Right. So there's this wonderful thing that curated data. Actually, GEO goes in and they do additional analysis and split it up by individual genes and so on. So we now have the possibility to. It's a real value, essentially a free value add. That now we have all this additional slicing and dicing and processing of our data that's being done by somebody else. But what that means now is, from a technology perspective, is now all of a sudden we can query over 20,000 genes, right? Not just the 2 that we thought we were looking at. So we've been doing a lot of thinking about how to present those kinds of much richer data to the end user. And actually, I'm going to hold off on this website. I'm going to show. I'll show you. You'll see this in just a moment. So I'm going to cut to the punch here. So what we've done is we've enabled browsing and queries of relevant GEO data sets directly from FaceBase. We've merged curated data into the data sets. We can go into GEO directly from the FaceBase hub. It's integrated into the data browser. I think this is really very cool, and hopefully you will as well, and we'll see this momentarily. And then Paul's got a bunch of next steps, which maybe we'll discuss tomorrow a bit. But this real question, there are some kind of organizational things we want to do to tie these data sets together. How we can, kind of advance getting the visibility of FaceBase within Geo and having them curate all of our data sets, for example, is something that would be potentially desirable. This seems like a huge value proposition for us. So I think this is, so for example, getting FaceBase in project fields in the Geo data would make it much easier for us to connect up our data with the data that's in Geo, for example, is something that we'd like to do. Anything else you want to add to this? Okay, so I'm very excited about that. I think this is a wonderful thing. Now let's talk briefly about some of the work that we've done on the FaceBase, what we call the data browser. So we kind of look at it as there's two pieces. There's the FaceBase website, which is kind of presents and organizes kind of all kinds of general information, and you'll see that in a moment. And then a separate application, which we call the data browser, which is your kind of point of contact for querying and interacting with the collected FaceBase data. We've done a couple of things. I'm just going to hit the highlights, and then we'll get to actually see this thing in action. So we've introduced a concept which is called faceted browsing. So as I think I had mentioned at the kickoff meeting, the kind of the model here is think about a shopping site, like Amazon or eBay, Newegg, any of those kinds of sites where you've got lots of different types of things with lots of different characteristics. So how do you go in and you don't know what you're looking for, how do you find out what it is that you're looking for? And I think in the FaceBase case, it's even a little more challenging than that because we don't know if we want shirts or a pair of pants or, even what it is that the store sells. So we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to present the diverse FaceBase data to an end user in a way that they can figure out what's there and what they want. And so we think faceted browsing is an important part of that. We've been spending a lot of time on trying to make the data presentation simpler and more uniform, so less variation from project to project and data type to data type. We've integrated some new 3D visualization, which we're very excited about, and I'll show you that momentarily. We've also introduced some new data types. So, for example, previously it was hard to find the OPT data. So now we've brought that out, and so it's much more explicit to find things coming from certain instruments or certain types of data. We've got the integration with the geodata products, and I'll show you that. And then the other thing, this is, there's lots of, again, this probably doesn't matter so much to you as it does to us. Underneath this, there's lots of very cool and sophisticated technology that's going to make it easier for us to provide a much more integrated and intuitive end user experience. So for example, the data browser that we're going to show you is totally auto and self-configuring. So if we throw a new type of data in or add a new attribute field in a metadata model, we don't have to recode any of the user interface. It kind of automatically figures this out and adjusts itself. And this will allow us to do things like personalization, do different views for different workflows. So there's all kinds of things that this will let us do in the future. So we're very pleased with that. So now what I'm going to show you is the preview, what we're calling a preview of the new hub site. So I want to have a couple of caveats going in here. So this is still a work in progress. You're seeing the very latest and greatest. We're actively making changes every day, several times a day. So there are some things that are in the site that don't quite work yet. There's some things that are missing, and there's some things that are going to change. So there's lots going on, but what we're going to show you, we believe is the core. There's enough functionality. It looks close enough to what we're going to provide as the initial release that we feel comfortable letting you in the room and you outside the room see this. And we very much want your feedback on what you're seeing. But please provide your feedback with in the context that this is a preview, it's not done, and we want, and your input is going to be vital to getting from where we have to something that's going to be usable for the broader community. There's been, as I said, a significant amount of cleanup of the legacy data, but that's not done. So there's certain things that will get better just by restructuring the data. Again, those of you who contributed FaceBase 1, the legacy data, who want to work with us to clean it up, we would be happy to have that conversation, because we can take what's there and I think make it more powerful and more usable by doing just a little bit of additional data cleaning work on top of it. But we're not in a position to do that. We need your help in order to do that. We've done very limited performance tuning, so it's okay. It will get better. So if things seem a little pokey sometimes, again, be a little patient. A lot of that will get better as we do more performance tuning. There's something that we call mini site functionality that we haven't incorporated yet. For example, the facial norms. There's this little calculator and a bunch of kind of tools built around that. So we haven't really done any of that kind of more specialized display or organizational work. I mean, again, that's something we'd like to talk to you about. What we focused on is uniform display and interaction for all the data across all the projects, and not these kind of more specialized data-specific experiences. So we haven't really done any of that mini-site type of thing. And then the UI, we've been working with a user experience expert. We've got the UI will probably change a bit. We've got some new design that we have not implemented yet. It's just in wireframe. Towards the end, I'll show you what that wireframe looks like. And I think this will, again, we're quite excited about this. I think it'll make the user experience even better. But so just, you're on notice that the actual details of the interface will probably change somewhat going forward as well. Right, then this, and then we'll cut to the chase here. So we want your feedback. Download is not enabled on this, so you can't download the data yet, but all the navigation discovery, that is enabled. There is a feedback form available on the preview site. So please tell us anything, no matter how small. We'll respond to all the questions and submissions. Again, with the caveat, this is a work in progress. We're not saying we'll follow through and do everything you suggest, but we will look at everything and acknowledge it and incorporate all the feedback we get. And this goes for the people out there in TV land. This is your reward for participating in this remote session. We want your input as well. So again, this is a preview. It's not a general release, but I think the people on the remote participants actually represent a different user community. Actually, you represent the users rather than the data producers to a large extent. So we're really interested in your perspective as well. So, but this is a preview for a limited audience. Please interact with it in the spirit in which it's being presented. There is a form linked on the home page and then the contact page, so you can just go to that form, fill it out, put your email address in, whatever your observations, suggestions, bugs, no matter how simple or trivial it seems, we welcome that. So with that, okay, let's look at the new FaceBase site. And again, in this conversation, feel free to, I'm going to extend the page here a little bit. Feel free to make suggestions. I mean, we can be interactive here. So this is the new site. This is now the page, the home page, the landing page that you see when you go into the site. So we've done a couple of things here. One is we tried to kind of greatly simplify and streamline what you see when you show up the site first. So, and we wanted to lead with the thing that we care about, which is the data. So we thought about a variety of ways of leading with the data, start with the data. We ended up with using this kind of a slide, what do we call these?
Carousel.
Carousel. So this is, again, a fairly standard technique that's being used. So what we're seeing is we've just picked a subset of the FaceBase data that we thought was interesting and are presenting it. You're getting a little hint here of the new interactive 3D browsing, which I'll show you in more detail momentarily. So basically, this is, and we can change this. This is really easy to change and generate. So this is, cool stuff that would, eye candy, that will suck you in. And then just very simple homepage here. How do I search for the data? What's the policy? How do I contribute? How do I request access to human data? News and upcoming events, and that's that's kind of the approach that we're taking, and that's really all there is on the front page. And then up at the top, we have a variety of kind of what we thought was the highlight of the things that were going to be interesting for interacting with FaceBase and using FaceBase data. So a list of the methods. So the data standards, the metadata method standards, tools, data access policies, just a little, about FaceBase, list of the projects. So these have actually all been updated. So project list, how to get help, and then just basically contact information, which includes our feedback form. All right, so that's the basic top-level interface and the content. Our feeling was lead with the data, keep it simple, and get to the action, which is actually the FaceBase data. Did I capture anything else?
Pretty much.
That's pretty much it. Okay.
And the content is in progress too. So there's a lot of writing still going on.
Yeah, so the structure, we spent a fair amount of time kind of iterating through the structure. It can still be changed if you think that we've gotten something wrong. The content, we're increasingly pouring in the content. There's slightly less gibberish and more actual content there. But if you see some stuff in pseudo-Latin, then that we know it's going to get fixed. All right. So that's that structure. Now let's get to the action. And what you see here is now from the top level data, we have three sources of data. And maybe I'll do it this way. So we've actually done this two ways. So one is we can enter at the top level from the three different data providers, which is the track browser, Geo, and the FaceBase repository. We've also in this integrated links within the actual data set itself off to these other repositories. But let me just show you this from the top level, and then we'll kind of get back to the same thing by kind of crawling through the data and then out. So here is, this is the link off to the track browser. This was, I believe, the last thing Mary's group did. So this basically now pulls us off to the Santa Cruz track browser. But this data is now hosted in our repository, so we're using a track hub. So this is no longer living outside, it's living inside. Right? So this is just an easy way to get from the FaceBase site to the track data. And again, we've got links to this also embedded in the appropriate place within the data set. So we can get there from our data browser. So that's one thing. So that's something you might have seen before. Here's something you haven't seen before. So this is now going to the Gene Omnibus to search for FaceBase data that's been placed there. And so what this is actually, this is work that Paul's group did. So this is, we basically, and this is live, right? So what we're not doing is writing down a list of the data. We're actually going off and querying the Geo database, find the stuff that's connected to the data that we have, and dynamically constructing this list. Right? And so, okay, so that's kind of interesting. But here's now the real value proposition. You're going to have to help me here, Paul. But if we go to Analyze Curated Data Set, now what we've done is we've got this, basically now we've got the expression data, all the other genes that are in the array. right? So what we can, so we've taken the initial data that we've got, and it's been sliced and diced into 20-some thousand other files, one for each gene, right? So now we can go and we can search on a particular gene and get back the expression data, you know, for that particular gene. So this is actually a value add, right? It's data that we didn't have before that we have now, which is now linked into the site. We're going to do a much more integrated job of linking this in going forward. The other value proposition we have here is that for people who don't know how to find what they want on the Geo site, we can just go in through the FaceBase data sites, and you pop up in Geo, and it's picked the expression data that you want, right? So you don't have to figure out what's the search term and where is it and what's its name. So we've really streamlined that process of going into Geo and finding the relevant data. Anything else you want to add?
We've also worked out how to actually do gene-based queries. If somebody actually enters a gene, they can get directly to differential expression for all of the curated data sets for that gene. So that's also queryable.
Right.
So there are a lot of nice things you can do once the data has been curated.
Right, and where these will connect up is we're working out how to do a gene query where you don't know the genes off the top of your head, but use the user interface to help guide you through typing in the gene name you want or the nickname for the gene, and then constructing that query and going off dynamically. So it'll be a much more kind of integrated experience.
Yeah, so from the user perspective, they're just going to be able to do the search from one place. They're going to be able to search from FaceBase, but you get access to all the Geo data. So you don't even have to necessarily know you're going to Geo. The point is to have that one search interface.
Okay, so those are kind of the external sources of data. Now let's look at kind of the new FaceBase interface. So this is now the data browser, all right? Now everything you're seeing is so this is basically now this application that's running on top of our data service with the new data model. And so you can see the structure is in some sense quite different than what we had in the previous implementation. So what we have on the left over here are basically the metadata attributes or the attributes of the data. This is what's called the faceted search. So these are the things, search terms we're searching over, and here's the things that correspond to those search terms. And what we see here is we have, now these numbers here indicate the number of items that we have for each one of these terms. So for example, if we go here, now we can expand, we see the name, I don't know if you can see this in the back, but what we have here are the names of all the investigators that contributed the data. So if we know we want to get data from a certain project or a certain investigator, all we need to do is say, we'll go to our favorite investigator. Well, no, we have no favorite investigator. So now all of a sudden, what we've just gotten is we've now just restricted all our data to stuff that Young has produced. Now again, this is a subset of all the things that we might look at. What we've done is we've looked at the structure of the data. We've picked out the terms that are most likely most interesting based on their frequency and distribution. So there's a simple algorithm. But there's some other things where, you know, maybe here's one that turns out to be quite useful. So here's actually all the other terms. The one I like is instrument. So let's add instrument. So now if we go back here, we see now we've got an instrument list. Now this is an example where we've done some kind of restructuring and cleanup of the data. What we see is that Young has only produced data from two instruments, the Affymetrix and the Affymetrix mouse. And so now we can select the data based on how the data was produced. Now let's say we want to add four sets sitting in the back there. So now we've got two investigators. That didn't really change the instrument at all. Let's see, who would have something different? Well, let's do this. I'll just reset. Let's add the instrument back in. Now, if we look at the instrument, we see that we actually have five different types of instruments that have produced data. And kind of the interesting thing that happens here if we now go back and just look at, so when we see here what we have are the number of data elements for each of those things. If we go back and we just select Yang, we go in and say, well, now that we've added Yang to the list, well, he's only generated these two instruments. So now we've basically updated the data. So this allows you to kind of wander around and explore the space of what the data looks like in a consistent way and kind of focus in on what you want. Let's look. Yeah.
So there's MicroCT data there, but there's no instrument corresponding to that? Or?
No. So this is part of the data cleanup issue, that there are, things that if we were to go back with the creator of the data, we could add additional information and make the data more useful and searchable, right? So I think that's, exactly there's a number of things like that where as a consortium, we should decide how much effort we want in kind of going back to the existing data and making it more usable. Right? We could spend a huge amount of time doing that, but it might very well be worthwhile to spend a little bit of time and clean it up a little bit. That would make it a bit easier. But here's what we could do, is that if we go now and look at the data type, what we see is that Yang has produced expression microarray data and CT and MR images, right? So now we can toss this in, which is, well, what I really want is the MicroCT. And now what I've got is the data sets that he's produced that have MicroCT. And then we could also, now we could add, right, so what's happened is now that now we print MicroCT, the instrument is dropped off because we've only got the CT data. But now, if we were to add in also the term that we want gene expression data, notice the instrument comes back in, and now we can select the instrument that produced the expression data. So let's look at some of this. So here's, let's pick a nice one. So now for each of these, we can, I hope this is a nice one. So there's a bad file here, that's why we're not seeing anything there. But essentially now what we've got is the previous summary view of this is everything we know about this particular piece of data. All right? Now here's a new thing. So let's just pick this one. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the load button. And hopefully something exciting will happen here. Or not. Loading a little slow. Let's see what happens if we do this. Yeah, maybe that's not a good load button to hit. Let's try another load button. Okay, as I said, this is a work in progress. Let's try a different data set. Okay. Come on. Okay, well, that's unfortunate. What's going on here? Try a different browser.
Clear your cache.
Should I clear my cache?
Yeah.
I thought I did clear.
Let's try that.
Okay, we're going to try clearing our cache because things have changed.
This page should have summaries on it. So.
Yeah, so let's go back here. Try this. Oh, that doesn't have any image. So data type. So MicroCT. Let's try that one. Try that.
I think you got some. You probably got something stale in there.
Okay.
Can I just clear it for a second?
Yeah, we've been changing the code, and it's probably some old code left in the.
You mind if I just clear it?
Clear everything.
Okay. Not coming up.
Or we could do is start another browser. As they say, this was working yesterday. Better? Does it look better?
Uh-huh. And then what do you want to
It's
say?
actually working for people looking on their laptop. Maybe your server's over.
Actually, that's a
Yeah,
distinct.
it's because we
A moment ago.
Okay.
and there you
Yeah.
go.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
So it's because as we develop it, you have to get rid of the old application out of your cache.
Yeah, so
You have to make a tweak.
So actually what we're looking at here is not some of Yang's data. This is actually something that was kind of cool. This is some of Axel's data. So what we did is, if you recall in the old FaceBase site, there was basically you had 3 axial projections for the OPT data. And so you could kind of scan along either dimension. So what we've done is something, we've taken that data and we've morphed it. So we did 2 things. One is that we took that OPT data and we kind of surfaced it directly in the data set. So now if you search on OPT as a data type, you actually see that. And you can use that as a search criteria. So, so you have both kind of the genetic part and the imaging part. Then what we've done is we've integrated a 3D data browser. So, and this is just basically a preview view. I'm going to go for a bigger view just to give you, it's a little bit easier to see here. Now this is all delivered just standard web browser technology. This is, oh geez.
Oh, snap.
Yeah. Let's try again. There we go. All right, so what we see here is now an interactive 3D browser. So we can rotate, we can interactively go through and slice it. We can zoom in, we can zoom out, we can change the position. We can also change the contrast, maybe. We can swap this, so now we've got the 2D view here, and we've put the 3D view there. So now let's do something. I'm going to really risk things here. So we can tune this in various ways. We can change the thresholds and the levels that we see in the window. The other thing, now I'm really pushing my luck here. We can do is take the data and do the 3D rendering. So this is all being done actually in the web browser. It takes just a little time here. And it actually is going to want to render it 3 times. So I'm just going to force it to do the other renderings. But what we see here is now we've created basically the, and it's going to want to render it once more. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so basically it needs to render 3 times. Now it's done with that. Here comes the third one. There we go. And now we can interact with the 3D. We're doing the 2D cuts here. These are ortho slices, but this particular software we're using will actually allow us to do arbitrary cuts as well. We don't have that enabled. We can do cool things by setting the thresholding interactively. We can actually do isosurfacing to some extent. So we can pull out sub-features. We can change the opacity. I mean, there's all kinds of things we can do. We've basically been just trying to get the basic functionality going here, but now you can see we're kind of looking inside and looking at some of the internal structure. And again, we can, slice and dice through here in the 3 planes and all the other stuff. Zoom in, zoom out. So that's the integration of the 3D. And we've already got a commitment from Axel that we're going to go back and clean up this OPT data and make it nicer. We actually reconstructed this from kind of secondary data source, so we're going to go back to the original. And
importantly, eventually this will be red and green. So, because right now you can't really see the
Right.
important parts, the actual signal, but it's just a.
Right, well, so the kind of thing we could do, I believe, quite easily for this, and again, this is where we need feedback, is, I would think it would be really easy to, should be straightforward to add another slider in here, which is that we do this as a two-color image, and here's the threshold for what's red and what's green, right? So we could imagine adding a whole bunch of controls to this to allow you to do more interactive, and this is the direction we want to go, kind of much more interactive exploration of the data. So, what are the functions that we want, and then what makes sense to do through this kind of web-based experience. But doing things like setting red and green, a threshold for what we do in red and what we do in green, should be easy for me to say, but should be fairly straightforward, and there's a natural place to put those kinds of controls in. So, yeah, I don't know why this is. Let's see, so I think I've hit maybe most of the highlights here. So we've seen the faceted browsing. We've seen that we can do the drill down. Again, this is kind of now what we've done is taken all the different data types and give you a single way of navigating through all of them, right? So we can decide whether we want to look. Oh, I know what we wanted to do. So if we look at, where was it? So we looked at, where is it? Is this where we'll see it? Oh, and we want yang. Yeah. So this is where we can see, let's see, Paul, where will we find some of the, here it is. So here's the integration. So, I mean, this seems trivial, but notice how quickly I found this. I said I want gene expression data, and I want it from Yang. So I knew that was what I wanted, because I happen to know that his data is the stuff that's been stuck on Geo. And this is the integration. So notice here now we've got the Geo data set there. And now all we need to do is click that button. And now we're off in Geo. And now we're looking at this data in Geo. And again, this has the value proposition that now we've got the per gene slicing for the curated data. So, so that shows then the linkage with the external sites. What else? Did I miss anything? Any questions so far?
Carl, I have one on chat.
Sure.
Can you segment out regions using the web interface, or do you have to download the full data set? Segmenting is a major analysis that is commonly done with 3D data sets. Also, can we change the orthogonal planes?
Yeah. So let's see if I can answer that. So we don't have any actual image segmentation in here at this point. You can kind of, if the segmentation that you want to do is based on intensity, we can set the thresholding, so you can do kind of isosurfacing through setting the thresholding levels. But we haven't integrated any actual image segmentation yet. The ortho slices are basically done in the software based on, I believe it's just orthogonal to an RAS coordinate plane. There is a capability in the software to do arbitrary slicing that's not even ortho slicing. And we haven't enabled that on what we've seen so far. I would say that one of the things that would be useful is to get from the users in the community. I mean, there's a slippery slope here. We want to provide as much interaction in the online tools as kind of makes sense to make those tools productive. But, at some point, it becomes the job of a real interactive imaging system, and you want to download it and put it in your fancy imaging system. So, I think we want to carefully look at what additional features we want to add that makes sense to do through the browser, and then prioritize and add them, and then also get to the point where you download it and stick it in your fancy, locally hosted image processing segmentation analysis tool, whether it's Slicer or Amera or what have you. But we're certainly interested in, getting input as to what additional features might be useful in these visualization tools, and the ones that make sense to do, we would certainly, add those. And we want to do more also visualization on the genetics side. So I think there's all kinds of, things we can do there. Other types of data that we might have that are not imaging. We don't really have, so these are focused more towards the 3D volumes. There's some other things we might want to do in 2D that would be slightly different. This is the general path. And then there's other things, kind of wandering around a little bit. So this stuff works really well for Yang's images and Axel's images. Yang's images because he gives them to us in Nifty format, which is widely used. Your images because we converted the PNG to Nifty, and that's widely used. But our other MicroCT is in a proprietary vendor format. So, for example, they're AIM files, which our tools can't see. So this raises two questions. Should we go back to the legacy data and convert the AIM files to Nifty files? Do we still keep the AIM files, or do we just convert them to Nifty or some other 3D format? And going forward with FaceBase 2, do we say, if you're giving us 3D volumes, you should provide them in this format so all the other tools work? Or are we silent on the format? I can tell you what I would like the answer to be. But this kind of does raise some of these questions. So there's a whole bunch of MicroCT data that's out there that we can't see because it's in this format that you have to have vendor tools to read. And maybe bioformats can read it. Maybe, we haven't really played with that yet. So maybe we can convert it, maybe we can't. Seth?
So are there plans to allow people to upload those either overlaid or...
Yeah, so we could do that. So this tool does allow you to overlay labels and segments and surfaces and surface models. And, this is not a short term, but this goes to this notion of where we want to kind of blur the line between the producers and the consumers. So, if you were able to produce segmentation and labeling, could you combine this, or could we have multiple labelings? We want to do anatomical segmentation. For example, we do want to do anatomical segmentation. We want to label that with things from the ontology. So that's definitely a direction that we want to go at. Right now we're just so happy we can look at the 3D stuff and it kind of works most of the time. So our initial step is just get the 3D interactions in. There's notions of, there's an interest, for example, in doing side-by-side, so for comparative. So we would like to do that. Now, again, this goes back to a data cleaning thing. And we were discussing this last night, one of the issues is you shouldn't actually need to align the two images. What we should do is have everything in a common, this software does the right thing. We give you a common RAS coordinate system. It should align everything correctly to that system. So maybe our data doesn't have the right coordinate systems or isn't aligned in the files correctly. Should we go back, recurate all that data, align it all up so the front of the mouse is actually pointing forward, right? So that when you load the data, everyone's pointed in the same direction, right? We could do that. That would probably be the right thing to do. Do we want to do that? Then if we popped up a side-by-side, you wouldn't have to tweak it. It would be lined up and they'd all be pointing, nose forward. Going forward, should we say when you submit data to FaceBase, you will provide a RAS coordinate system and you will line the mouse up this way, right? So I think that's something we should discuss and give it to us in Nifty so we can read that coordinate system and correct the images. So that's, the kind of thing I think we should have that conversation. So when we get the new data, it will be more usable than if we hadn't had that conversation. So that's, I think, kind of all the highlights of that. Let me just give you a teaser then. I had mentioned, because I'm pretty much done with my time here. Here's the demo. Just to give you an idea, then we have, as I said, there's been the last month or two, we've also undergone a fair amount of kind of design review and usability review, really looking at, now that we're starting to do more of this interaction, what's the way we can really streamline the workflow? Going back and forth, search, view, analyze, edit. So really looking at closing that loop carefully. And so just to give you a hint, none of this has been implemented. This is just a wireframe, so this is done in Photoshop essentially. We've been playing around with looking at how you go forward, what are the paths you want to take, how can we present data so it's most useful. So this is an example of where we think we're going to go with the display, and then kind of the biggest, we could go through in detail why this looks this way. I won't, but I would say one of the biggest things that we'll do is we'll use more of a slide out rather than consume the real estate for the facets. We'll use more of a slide out kind of mechanism, and we've been giving a lot of thought to how do you, when you have a large number of attributes, and you could have attributes with large numbers of values like gene name, how do you want to interact with that so that the end user doesn't get overwhelmed? So we've been spending a lot of time thinking about, when we have 20,000 values from controlled vocabulary, like the gene names or the anatomical or phenotypic ontologies, which might have large numbers of terms. How can we provide streamlined ways of understanding not just the namespace, but the value space as well? And so we've been doing a lot of thinking about that, and think that this kind of interaction will be will allow you to very rapidly kind of go back and forth and discover things and narrow down and discover more things and bookmark your data so that now you can go back and look at it again tomorrow or share what you found with your colleagues. You can actually, so that's the direction we're going with that. And I'm done with my time. So that's kind of the summary of where we are. So, as I said, the site is literally improving daily. You're welcome to interact with it. Please be kind. Give us feedback. But be truthful, yeah. I think we've given a lot of thought to how this is structured, what the interaction looks like. We think it's a good direction. There's lots of room for improvement, and we're open to all suggestions. And that's it. Any other comments? Just silence. Everyone's looking at the website or just saying, how could they have done that? All right.
I can put you in touch with the FaceBase 1 PIs who aren't part of FaceBase 2.
Mm-hmm.
And you can discuss with them, how much effort you want to put into cleaning up the data.
Yeah, so I think it's something we should probably do. I think that kind of given where we are, there is some utility. There's a point of diminishing returns, but I think there's some low-hanging fruit where if we invested a little effort and got some kind of boots on the ground from the original PIs to help us, that we could probably improve the utility of what's there. It's a valuable data set. It'd be nice. It seems to me it's worth at least some effort to make it more accessible.
And it is the majority of the data you have.
It is the majority of the data we have.
No, we can talk about how to do that.
Yeah.
I can help you with that.
And then, ultimately, as I was saying, what we would like is to close the loop when the new awards come out for the consumption of FaceBase data. It'd be great if then those awards could contribute back somehow. So we're not in a position. So right now, we're going to be doing most of the heavy lifting on the curation. The goal is to use these kinds of interfaces to enable what we're calling self-curation, which is you'll go in, here's the fields, here's the values, here's how to pick the values, and so the producer of the data can publish. So basically, you can have the community publish as well. We're not there yet. It's going to be many, many months before we're there, probably, but that's where we're going.
Hi, this is Jeremy Green speaking from London. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, a bit.
I'll try. I'll try using the headphones. I don't know, might the microphone and nice. I just wanted to ask. I just wanted to ask whether you interact at all with any of the sort of species-based databases. I'm thinking particularly, I've had dealings with the Xenopus community database site, ZenBase, and they have some quite interesting, sort of fairly innovative sort of search interface things like kind of partial sequence-based searching to use in a text-based way, and also some kind of graphical anatomical searches. I know MGI has quite a lot of good stuff, but it might be worth looking at some of these more minor species for some sort of kind of, because they're smaller, they have to be a little bit more inventive.
Yeah, so I think the answer is, as of yet, we haven't. You know, I think that's something that we could put on our list of things to look at. You know, the primary integration that we've looked at to date has just been geo, and to some extent that was, well, I would say it's more than a proof of concept. I mean, I think it's really valuable, and it's going to be part of the system, the core part of the system that we're rolling out, looking at integration with other external sources that bring more value to the FaceBase data. I think is something that we'll definitely want to do. And so I think we'll want to find out where those sources are, and then you know, look at how we can do that integration. The whole platform that we built is based on what's called the web services architecture. Because, for example, Geo did provide these APIs that allow us to interact with their data, it was possible for us to integrate it in this nice way. And so, you know, we think we could probably replicate that process with other data repositories as long as they can provide us those APIs for accessing the data. And we're going to want to do that. It's a question of priorities and timing.
Sure. Thank you.